I was in
Testing.
Yeah.
All right, we are live,
I knew you would.
live and ready to roll.
Testing. And we are live. I'm just reading from the teleprompter.
There you go.
Good evening, and we will now begin the Riverside City Council work session for Thursday, May 11th, 2023. If you would all please rise, pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Denny.
Here.
Mrs. Franklin. Ms. Fry.
Here.
Mr. Joseph.
Here.
Ms. Lomach.
Yes.
Mr. Maxfield.
Present.
Mayor Williams.
Here. Is there a motion?
to excuse. Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Maxfield and a second from Mr. Joseph to excuse Mrs. Franklin from tonight's meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Mr. Manager, any additions or corrections to the agenda as presented?
No, Mr. Mayor.
All right.
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion from the Deputy Mayor and a second from Mr. Joseph to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. We will move on to the next item on our agenda. That is the work session, of which we have 4 items to discuss tonight, and I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I will actually turn it over to Mr. Lohr, who has some briefing for us regarding park use agreements related to Community Park and potentially Shellabarger Park as well. So, Mr. Lohr, take it away.
Thank you. Good evening. As the manager said, I have some items to discuss about sports team use of our city parks, community and Shellabarger. The Pee Wee Football League has an active license agreement for use of community park. That dates back to about 2012 when city manager Chudkowski entered into that agreement. Council passed a resolution at that time to enter into that agreement as well. Some of the issues, or I'll call it points of discussion that we've been having with the Pee Wee Football League, as well as some of the members of the community, are a big one is access. Of course, you know, with the Pee Wee Football League, it's a big group of kids when they use it for games and for practices. So that there's been some concerns from the community about making sure that they can get access to use the park. Some of the other items that we've had in the current agreement, electricity has been a point of discussion for us. Right now, we're currently paying the majority of the electricity costs for the use of that field. Yes. So there are a number of things that we wanted to kind of clean up in the agreement and work out. So over the past few months, Ms. Bartlett and I have been working with the Mad River Indians to come up with an updated license agreement that addresses some of these. So I'll hit some of the high points of things that we're going to try to correct with this new agreement. So I mentioned the electricity. So as opposed to the city paying the majority of the costs for the Indians to use that field, we've asked that they pay it's 75% of the concession stand, which would reflect what the time, the period of the year that they use the field now with the addition of their flag football league. So they'll be using it 9 months of the year. The city would take the other 25% of electricity for the concession stand, as well as the league would pick up 100% of the cost of running the field lights. So that's how we're working to address that. One of the other issues that I mentioned was access. So right now, as it's been done in the past, the city does not have access to the concession stand. And so we've asked that they install a Knox box on the concession stand that'll allow us access in case of an emergency. In addition to that, with city access, we would like to do inspections of the property on an annual basis. So we started with let's do an inspection at the end of the year, make sure that they've cleaned everything up. We had noticed some high heating bills over one of the winters that we had on record. And so, we'll check and make sure that they're putting the temperature down and kind of winterizing the building so that we don't have high electricity costs. But we'd also like to do one before the start of the season, make sure everything's good with the building and there aren't any issues there. We, Tom and Kevin and I got with our liability insurance people and reviewed the amounts in the contract to make sure that if there's an accident there, a building that's damaged or somebody's hurt, got the appropriate amounts in the contract to cover the city as an additional insured. The other is we've also asked, just put a provision in there for them to make sure that they're cleaning up and policing the litter on site and some provisions. What do we do if we notice that the litter hasn't been cleaned up? Well, we would notify them in writing that they need to take care of it. And then we could actually charge them, which we don't think we would have to do, but charge for cleanup of the property if it continue to be a problem there. So those are the things that we're looking to address. We would like to bring this negotiated license agreement before council sometime in June to look at. Right now, the Pee Wee Football League is taking a look at it. A week from tomorrow, they have a meeting. They're going to discuss the draft agreement with their board and make sure that they're okay with it. One thing that I failed to mention, I did say that we had some concerns from the residents about access to the park when it's being used. So the current agreement as it stands prohibits the football league from stopping anybody from coming into the park. But there's just some confusion surrounding that. So what we did is we worked with the football league to come up with kind of a plan as to how people are going to come in and out of the park and where we're going to have signage. So we're going to try to direct the foot traffic of the residents coming in to walk the track or use the basketball courts along that side road. I can't remember what the name of the road is, but there's an entrance that allows you to come in. Yeah. We're going to direct any handicap access is coming through the main entrance. And we're going to have signage that details all these instructions. And then we're also going to have all the main football traffic. People who are coming in to watch the games or participate in practice, they're going to come in through the main entrance. And they're going to have, the football league's going to have people stationed there to kind of help that process along the way. So that's what we have with that. Are there any questions with the Pee Wee football agreement? Yes.
So one thing that has been brought to light recently is, my question is, who is in charge of the maintenance of the heating system for that?
That is a good question. As far as I understand it, they would be responsible for the maintenance of it. You're talking about the HVAC, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That's my understanding. That's not something that we discussed specifically though. But I can take a look at the agreement and make sure.
I would think that we might want to put something that they have I don't know, tune up every year and they show us.
Yes.
Receipt for that.
Right.
And I'm good with that, but with what happened at Roar, I don't want to see the same situation happen at.
Yes.
Community.
Right. Agreed. Okay. I will make sure that that's addressed appropriately.
It's just a thought,
Mhm.
but we know that heating and air conditioning systems
Well,
don't last
and
forever.
in regards to access to the park, I will tell you, practice nights,
Mhm.
nobody is prevented from coming into that park.
Yeah.
I know game days are a little bit different because they're trying to charge admission for people to come in and
Right.
all that. That's a little bit different. I can see working some of that, but as far as through the week, nobody is prevented from coming in or
Right.
accessing that park whatsoever.
Yeah. And as far as I know, I haven't heard that anybody's been physically stopped from going into the park, but I think there's the perception that, oh, the park's in use, I shouldn't go in there and use it. So we're hoping with some of the signage,
Mhm.
we can convey to the residents that they're still allowed to come in there and use the park. As well as, and once we get the map finalized, I think it might be worthwhile to post it on the website and social media, just so everybody understands how it's supposed to work, and it gets it out there to the community, and they can understand that it's still available for them.
And someplace to report it if it doesn't work.
Exactly, they can give us a call.
Okay, so
Mhm.
the concession stand, they lease that year round?
No, it is, it's a period of time that they're allowed to use it. And so, it is roughly April through the end of November. But it's an interesting situation. We own all the facilities there, but they're the only ones that use it.
Right.
But
So other residents have access to use the facility if they wanted to for that
No.
period of time, and restrict it to them for that period of time throughout the year.
they
So-
have, yeah,
they
they
have
have exclusive use of the buildings during the period of the year.
They've
And-
also invested a lot of money.
Okay.
Right. I mean, yeah, and I don't, I can't imagine a circumstance where we would want another community organization to
Okay.
use those facilities in the off season. Just because of the circumstances there. I'm not ruling it out, but I think that would.
So
be
with
an issue, yeah.
within this agreement, I just want to make sure that, this is a nonprofit organization
Yes.
that is a great service to our community.
Mhm.
I just want to make sure we're not hamstringing them as well,
Right.
because they barely break even every year, if
Yeah.
even that, so.
Well, I was gonna say, when did, used to be, when I was involved with those, that
Mhm.
they paid all the light and the maintenance of the grass on the field. Is that still? You're saying 75% of the time?
So, yeah, so they are currently, as I understand it, they pay for the electricity for the lights. But we at the city.
For
have
the
been-
field lights,
For the field lights, yes, I'm sorry, let me be clear that, yeah, just
Okay.
for the field lights,
and they
but-
pay all of that.
they pay all of that, yeah. With the concession stand, the city has been paying 100% of that, so we would like for them to continue to pay for the lights as well as the concession stand for the part of the year that they're actually going to be using it.
Well, it's metered separately. The
Yes,
field lights are
those are,
metered.
yeah, we actually have,
Yeah,
two or three different meters.
Right.
For that part. But that was our request. We were, when Miss Bartlett and I discussed it with them, we were very cognizant of the fact that they are a nonprofit. And so, we asked, is this something that you think would be reasonable for you all to pay the electricity since you are the exclusive user? And they seemed comfortable with that. They have discussed that particular aspect and said they were comfortable with it earlier in the year. Next Friday, a week from Friday, they're going to meet and discuss all the final draft language in there. And make sure they're comfortable with the rest of it.
and are they doing the mowing? I mean, because they do it, or are we
They-
doing? Because I've been asked about
Yeah.
the lights and I've been asked about who mows it, because it always looks nice.
Mhm.
And I
It
have,
does.
I want to be sure I'm saying the right
They
thing.
have somebody that volunteers to
To-
mow,
to-
and take care of the football field. aspect of it.
Not the
I'm
rest
assuming
of
the
the
main,
park.
we take care of the rest of the. park,
Exactly.
correct?
That's correct. They maintain and they want to maintain the field.
Yes.
And they take very good care of it.
We don't own their equipment and announces shack, do we? We never have before.
We, as I understand it, and we might need to ask an attorney, but anything that's been built there on the property, any
Becomes
structure
ours.
is owned by the city,
But they maintain it.
but they maintain it.
Okay.
Right, so if we're saying that your perception is that the facility there, you wouldn't want to see anybody else utilize it throughout the rest of the year. So wouldn't it make sense to just give them like an annual lease to the facility? And then I think to Jesse's point, the access is a little concerning to me because this
Mhm.
is a nonprofit organization and they are running an event out of that space that they
Yes.
pay money to maintain and upkeep.
Mhm.
And their source of income is by charging admission or
Mhm.
player registration fees. So if they're having an event for like usually at night. Or do they do day games too?
All day
Saturday, Sunday,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, is there a possibility of closing the park
That's what I'm saying. 'Cause I
during
mean,
that time?
you can't, I don't see a way where you can police like exclusivity to the, like, to that portion of the park where you wouldn't burden them with having to like have a wristband to stand in like a,
They do wristbands, don't they?
yeah.
like I've
so-
got-
They might do like
before.
a hand stamp or something like
Uh,
that.
Okay, maybe I'm thinking of
But I
that.
still feel like that is a kind of a burdensome.
I mean, I feel like that's something we can run by an attorney. The essential conundrum here is that it's ultimately a public asset and we wouldn't ordinarily restrict access to the asset. So, but if you have a user, and this kind of bleeds in actually to the next conversation we're going to have too, because one of the gap areas that I think we ought to address sooner rather than later is this kind of a concept, because for example, we have park shelter reservations. We do not have a mechanism right now to give someone full access to a park, which is effectively what this is, you know?
Right.
So to the extent that that's a process that we're going to continue to untangle, we are looking at that, but there is that balance.
So in
there's
the
also-
city of Cheviot, the public park there,
Mhm.
Harvest Home, they there's like 4 Catholic schools that use that for their school festival. There's the Kiwanis out there that uses that, and they charge admission to the park, like the entirety of the public asset of the park. So I feel like this is a similar scenario where a nonprofit organization is wanting to lease out access to a public park and they're paying like in service, they're paying a fee to the city to utilize that facility. I don't see where the issue is with them having like exclusive control over the park at a set
I
period of
do.
time.
Well, because
I
it's
do.
several Saturdays and Sundays in a row.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, I think
It's all
in
false.
fairness, it's
Well,
it's not every
Saturday.
true.
They're away sometime, but also the back end of that part, you can't, it's not fenced to where you can't get in. I mean, where we put in the new play equipment and all that, that is not barriered so that you can't get in. So to keep people out of the park right now under the current fencing, that would be impossible.
Well, and I think, and just to kind of put a bow on it, I mean, I think we certainly understand your perception and also the counter perception, which is, and that I guess is, I don't want to say anything tonight that's gonna sound too much like we have come down one way or the other on where exactly that line is. I think that's an open legal question that we are going to try to suss out.
We had these discussions way back
Oh, we
20 years ago.
talked.
And the issue was, and what the conclusion was, they charge as they come in. And if somebody says, but I'm not here to see the game, I'm here to use the dog park or whatever, then they allow them to go in. So I don't have an issue with that situation because I know that the league itself says you have to charge $2 or $3 a person to get in.
Say $5 or
Whatever the
$5.
answer, $5, whatever the answer is now.
was
Inflation.
20 years ago, Mike.
Inflation.
According to everybody.
$2, all right? And people were complaining about that. And because they wanted to be able to use the park
Right.
at that same time, because they were only playing in the football field area and they wanted to be able to go either use the volleyball area or the dog park or the picnic shelter.
And I clearly
And-
understand that
and
part of it
that's the
too.
agreement that
Yeah.
we've always had with the football.
I just didn't know to eliminate, was that a possibility? Because I know some places do stuff. I'm okay with allowing people to come use the park. I just didn't know if that was a possibility or not.
And I think, I thought that was a reasonable,
Mhm.
way to do it at the time.
Yeah.
You know, now, for a while, they had, people felt intimidated by, but all they had to say was, they're here just to use the parking.
Mhm.
And if we put that up on the sign,
But the only thing I worry about with signage and things like that, what prevents
somebody.
half the people coming
Well,
in saying, I'm here to use the park, I'm here to use the park,
Mhm.
but they
So-
go
When
and
did
watch.
you have
the football
something?
game.
Get that,
All I was
Yeah.
gonna offer is that it is one thing to have a festival or a once a year event. It is another thing to have an entire seasons of, large blocks of time that you would be using the park.
I mean, you're realistically talking about 4 to 5 weekends a year where there could be, or 4 to 5 Saturdays or 4 to 5 Sundays a year where they're actually have people at the
Charging
park
admission.
charging admission because, because they usually split the games.
And
So,
also they are buying gas and buying burgers and spending money in our city.
yeah, exactly. So that's the one thing I think, it's not like it's
Stand.
it's
Well,
not like it's
they-
10
but
weeks
it's a
in a
business.
row or 12 weeks in a row. It's usually probably 4, maybe 5 weekends a year where that park, that's on a Saturday or Sunday, pretty much all day, where it's being used. It's not, I mean, through the week, I will tell you, because I'm there. We do not prevent anybody from coming into the park or not using, saying you can't use it. I've never seen that happen, ever. I've been doing this my 5th or 6th
Yeah,
year.
the only time we ever had it. When.
It's usually game day, I'm sure.
And that was just educating the people at the gate to say, if they're, if
Yeah.
they're saying they're residents and just want to use the park, you gotta let them in.
Well, then it goes back to my point. If it's only 5 or 6 Saturdays a year, I mean, that's out of 365 days, that's still a limited. I mean, it's a service that we're offering to the children of our community and the parents of our community, that they have
But-
this access, and for them to be able to facilitate that, they need to be able to generate income.
But let
Parents
them
of
do the research on
children
it.
also take their children to the park on the weekends when they're not working.
That's good, I mean, valid point, absolutely.
Well, and I think that actually, that may be a good segue kind of into the next bullet, because we've run into similar situations over at Shellabarger with leagues. And so we might pivot into that if you're
That
ready,
works.
if that's a natural break.
Absolutely,
Okay.
sure. The other park that we have that is used for team sports is Shellabarger. So we've, over the past, let's say 5 years, we've had St. Helens, as well as, you're gonna have to remember, I always mix that, is Dominion Academy.
Temple Christian.
Temple Christian, thank you, okay.
For 5 years, it's been forever.
I don't know
Temple
about,
Christian's
well, that's my experience. I mean, I've only been working with
Well-
these two, 5, 6, 7 years. But yeah, over the last 5 years, with my experience, we've taken them through the Parks and Rec Commission. And it's become problematic at times to do this annually, because we're really wanting, Parks and Rec is really wanting to pin down the exact times that people want to use this park, so that we can have the park open to other users when it's not being used, right? Well, that comes into conflict with the leagues, when we will have some of these league schedules don't come out until weeks before the league starts. We have this history of St. Helens using Shellabarger, and Temple Christian using Shellabarger on an annual basis. The thought is, why don't we enter into some sort of long-term agreement there at Shellabarger Park? Just like we have with the Pee Wee Football League at Community Park, so that we kind of put it all down in an agreement. We get everybody in the league and the city on the same page on how it's going to work. And then the benefit, the benefit to the leagues is they can reliably expect to be able to use the park for their soccer seasons.
But
every
they
year.
don't charge for those games.
They don't, and that's one of the differences. They're not charging admissions for it.
Right.
But
I don't think
we-
admission's the issue. I think it's availability of fields.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, it's making sure that they can schedule games at Shellabarger on Saturday, the October 1st.
Mhm.
And they don't want to rely on that if the city's already had someone else come in and reserve that.
So
Right,
they gotta get together.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, Chris's point is
Yeah.
valid. They,
Mhm.
Parks and Recs asked for information in like January,
yeah,
reserve your field.
we've done that in the
And-
past, yeah.
I know from, my memory, the CYO, which is the league that CYO and say, they might not put out schedules till August 15th.
Yes,
And then somebody comes back to you and says, okay, here's what I need.
right.
So essentially what you're wanting them to do, say from this date to this date, they've got it reserved for league, kind of like
Mhm.
what Mad River, the football team does essentially, right, is what you're saying.
Yes, and I know when we've had the two leagues come through in previous seasons, the desire of the Parks and Rec Commission has been, you two work together, you two leagues, figure out how you can both, to the extent possible, use Shellabarger Park. And so we could work out something into that license agreement, where you have use of the park, but you're expected to work out scheduling with the other organization. assuming Temple Christian does want to continue using Shellbarger Park.
In a user agreement would be, because I'm more familiar with Shellabarger
Yes.
than community, but city cuts the grass
Yes.
during grass cutting
Mhm.
season. But typically, and just for my clarification, and maybe
Mhm.
anybody else up here, the teams, and if it like Temple Christian or St. Helens or whoever is using it, they would be responsible for putting paint down.
Yes.
Soccer goals are not owned by the city.
Right.
And I know that that's been something that in the past, St. Helens leave soccer goals out there and maybe
Yes.
they don't make it to the next season.
Yeah.
Or they put nets up and then might not make it through the
Mhm.
season.
Right.
But we as a city typically would tell an end user, if you want to use the park, that's fine. You know, you want to have a soccer game, but you guys have to line the field and you guys have to provide goals.
Yes, that would be something we would.
Right.
put in the agreement. I know in the past, nets, have been a concern. That is something.
But that's a risk you run.
Exactly. And we would want to work out, if St. Helens is using nets, do they want to remove them every time? Does Temple Christian want to use their own nets? That would be something we probably want to put down in writing so that we don't have to have that discussion every year.
Are we?
Go ahead, please, go ahead.
Are the adult folks using it on Sundays like they were last year? We dismissed them, but I think they
have
came back,
not-
but
We haven't had that complaint, I think maybe in 2 years, maybe not since the pandemic. We've had that in the past.
right.
And that's hopefully something that we don't have in the future, but they've never come in with a formal application to use the
Well,
fields.
we just need to be sure they know they have to do that. If
Yes.
they want to use it and understand no alcohol.
Right,
Well, and I think the other issue might be, just thinking about Shellabarger, for example, because I'm again more familiar with that. If Temple Christian or St. Helens brings in goals, which are not
Yes.
cheap, and they put up
Mhm.
nets, which, aren't cheap,
right.
and they leave them up thinking, well, we have our season from August to November, and there's folks coming on a Sunday to play, which, in a public park should be fine. But if Temple Christian or St. Helens leaves equipment there, a member of the public would reasonably assume that it's there, just like the basketball hoops. Well, I can shoot hoops, I can kick a ball into the soccer goal. But if then that's damaged, does Temple Christian or St. Helen come back to the city and say, well, what happened to our stuff? Then that's where I think the elements of the agreement would be important to know and make sure both sides understand.
Mhm.
Even with Temple Christian and St. Helens. I mean, I know there was times a few years ago where one team might show up and the other team's there on the field, practicing, playing. The field was here, it was already lined, there was already net and goals up. It was great. We just started playing. But that's where, having both sides talking, and obviously the city in the middle of that, playing air traffic controller.
Well, and I feel an organization that's based in Riverside should have a little bit more authority over the area than an organization that is based in city of Dayton as well. So that's something else we should be cognizant of too. If
Yeah.
there was those arguments, I mean, that's just my opinion.
To me, the other thing that should be in there, something that says, this is the schedule that we mow on. If you needed
Right.
more than that,
Mhm.
then you're on your own.
Sure.
If we mow it every 2 weeks,
Mhm.
and if their schedule, they need it shorter the
Mhm.
week that then
Yes.
then it's on them.
Yes, I
Yeah.
assume that's something that service
More of
would
an
like to
inconvenience.
see.
Well,
Yeah.
I just
But had to be addressed.
throwing it out there.
You're right. So if council is in general agreeable to the idea of getting them both the leagues on a license agreements, Ms. Bartlett and I will go ahead and schedule meetings with preferably the two groups together, and then start negotiating these license agreements.
Sure. It's a good
Okay.
idea to have it all in writing and
And that gives them a little better feel that
Mhm.
they know that between September and November, they know they can get in
Yes.
there regardless of what the league tells them their schedule is. They just gotta work it out with Temple Christian.
Yeah.
Vice versa.
all right. Any other questions so Mr. Manager, there will be an update after the Mad River football league, our leadership meeting.
Yep.
And then you'll have more information after you hear from them. And then you will, Chris and Kathy will kind of go back and start putting some language together for potential Schellebarger use agreements and kind of take the next step in that process. Is that kind of where we are?
Correct. The takeaway for item one is we'll wait to get some feedback from the football league regarding the scope of that agreement. And then based on that feedback, we'll work in some of the things that we heard today about making sure that we're paying attention to things like access and fees, those sorts of things. When we come back to you, I imagine it'll be at a work session where we can kind of preview that in detail. I'm not going to ask you to vote on it like right away. And then a similar approach on Schellebarger Park. What we'll do is Mr. Lohr and Ms. Bartlett will go ahead and schedule a meeting with those groups and try to get a draft together. And we'll follow a similar process and bring that back to you at a work session just to kind of preview where that's landed.
Do we have any update on the Aurora Park structure while we're talking about parks?
Not at this time, no.
Brenda, you had something?
Yes, so the lead in was that the hole that we're trying to fill is uses related to the entirety of the park. One thing we didn't discuss in this conversation was like festivals. Is that something that is still something that we need to address, and we'll touch that at a later time?
We will touch it at a later time. Yes,
Okay.
It is on the radar.
Okay,
But yeah, it is related. I brought it up only because these three agreements that we've discussed tonight specifically have to deal with leagues. We have the same kinds of challenges with things like festivals or requests to use the entirety of the park. So it's sort of the next step in this conversation. So I think we'll try to get the league situations solidified. And honestly, that will give us, I think, a firmer groundwork to start looking into how do we handle this for other kinds of uses.
okay, thank you.
And that's coming fast.
Time flies, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And
Unless it's flying American.
and then we are on to the next agenda item.
All right, next agenda item, I'll give a quick brief update on the stormwater utility fee and kind of where we are with that. As council and the viewing public will remember, this has been the subject of multiple conversations over many months. But I did want to hide this if I can, so we can see what's going on. Just kind of touch base on sort of where we are and kind of how the timeline, where the timeline's at and how that is likely to continue to evolve. So here in 2023, for the first 5 months of the year, what we've accomplished so far with respect to stormwater utility fees, we've selected our new general engineering firm who will help us continue to implement. We're working with that firm on a scope or task order to help us develop a policy manual. So that would be everything administratively that we will need to handle appeals, requests to change official square footages, survey requirements, all that other good stuff. We've drafted some initial educational materials, substantially completed the parcel calculations. So we've fed some test numbers, if you will, into a model to help calculate where we think what the outcome of a potential fee would be. And I'll share some of that with you here shortly. As part of that, we've updated the initial infrastructure costs for stormwater that we were provided. I think the last assessment was 2015 or 2016 to account for inflation, which we are all intimately familiar with at this point. And then we've also developed, again, that cost allocation model and options for how we might actually build this out. And we've selected or scheduled, our utility billing software for implementation sometime in third quarter of this year. So I've gone ahead and moved forward with SSI on their utility billing feature and have been in discussions with them about how to basically bring that to life and onboard it here over the next several months. So looking forward, where are we going? So the tentative timeline is that sometime in June, which is rapidly approaching, we are going to go ahead and initiate that task order with our engineer and work with them to help start pulling these manuals together. I know that in some preliminary work that's been done, we're looking at the manual that the city of Springfield uses. I believe that the city of Dayton uses and a couple of our other neighbors who have similar fees. So we'll probably kind of use that for inspiration and then customize it based on the specifics of our ordinance. And I know Ms. Bartlett's working with the engineering firm very diligently on that. In July, I'm looking to finalize and start publishing some of the preliminary educational pieces that we can post on our website. So things like, what is a stormwater utility fee? How does this work? What is a stormwater best management practice? What's a culvert? What's a ditch? Those kinds of things. That is a project that I intend to carry forward as we are working or talking about working with the school district on things like public information, public engagement. I'm going to float that as perhaps an initial project that we can pilot. In other words, how do we think about conveying this message and then getting these kinds of things posted? If worst comes to worst, we can always, post that ourselves on our website and do our own little campaign for that as well. By August, I hope that we will have finalized the collections strategy, meaning we'll have the utility billing module at least substantially implemented, if not well on our way to getting that set through the finance software and ready to have the amounts then imported when we are ready, when we have finalized those. By September, I would look at having estimated or proposed stormwater rate and collections concepts plugged into the 2024 budget, meaning I don't expect that we will make, or that I will ask council to make any sort of firm commitment on a rate until the latter half of this year or even early next, depending on how this calendar, continues to evolve. But I want us to go into the 2024 budget with some idea about what we are likely to be able to collect based on our target and based on all the different ways people may be able to pay for it. Part of the reason I say that is because, for example, the utility billing software will let folks pay directly with a credit card. They could come in and pay at the counter. Or the other option is if folks they'd also have the option to ignore the letter and just let us put it on the property tax bill as an assessment, similar to other fees that we charge after we've done an initial billing. If we have a whole lot of folks that opt to do that, though, we will only be collecting money when the county pays us. And that's only twice a year. So I don't want to overly be too aggressive about how we budget for this going into next year, because in a very real sense, it will depend in large part about what our rate actually is and how folks decide they want to pay.
So this 2024 will be year zero, so we can try and figure out what we're going to get.
Precisely. Yes. 2024 that's a great analogy. It's the year zero, similar to year zero of income tax. It would be a year zero for stormwater. I'm optimistic, though, that we'll have the policy elements of this ready to be adopted sometime in September or by the fourth quarter this year, meaning that would be the manual with all of our, how are we going to do all this on the back end that we've just discussed. And then going into December or potentially early next year, I would be ready to come to you with that final, as part of our omnibus resolution of fees. We would incorporate the proposed fee structure and the number in December or sometime first quarter next year. I think the thought process at the moment is that while we will calculate the rate on a monthly basis, we will likely only be able to bill annually. So that does give us some leeway in terms of if council sets a rate that's effective, even if for some reason we had to delay a process into March of next year, we would calculate the number of months, but then bill it all at once, for example. So just again, kind of a food for thought on timeline. The major obstacles that I can see as far as us being able to execute on this are candidly sort of personnel and capacity related here at City Hall. We've had a number of transitions. I know Mr. Garrett has talked about potentially separating this year as well and retiring. To be clear, he's not given us a date or anything, but I think in being mindful of the fact that that's a possibility and in deference to Mr. Garrett and being able to give him some time to make that decision as well. I don't necessarily want to rush anything, but when that transition happens, that will create the need to bring somebody new on board, to bring them up to speed, and then to continue the work of implementing all of this, which is why I've tried to I know the back end of this calendar feels a little bit fuzzy. That's really why. It's just, I want to be sure that we are building enough time to where if we have to go supplement with some finance staff, that we're able to do that in a way that's comfortable and that the organization can withstand. So that's kind of I know that's a lot in a nutshell, but in terms of what the next, 9 months or so, 12 months or so look like, that's kind of where we're at present. Any questions about timing or timelines?
The funds that are brought in from stormwater have to be used for stormwater control.
Correct.
Are we allowed to use funds that come in to hire somebody to direct that?
Yes, ma'am.
And you can use that fund to do that,
Yes, and that's
a
actually
personnel thing.
correct. You can use for any kind of a utility fee like this, you can take those funds and use them for capital or operating or personnel expenses that are directly related to that service. So if we are paying somebody to go build a stormwater culvert or maintain a drainage ditch,
Right,
that staff time can be paid for with the fee revenue.
okay.
If someone opts to have it as an assessment on their property tax, then we would just wait for the billing from Montgomery County to come through and we'd get that biannually, right? But what is the process like when the sale of a property happens?
How do you mean? If somebody if somebody opted to do that, but then sold, it would go the same way that, the next owner would pay the tax bill. It would be
Yeah,
a
just
line
like if
item on
you-
their tax bill.
When you go to buy a house, you typically pay back
Back
taxes on
If
that
back
house.
taxes.
Right,
owed.
but that's an option that we're allowing a current homeowner to have that as a payment option. What's the process of like the sale of a property? Do we get notified? Does the new homeowner have to opt into that agreement, or that just carries with the parcel?
Yeah,
Is now opted into that without them knowing that's how they have the one person that in 2023 is going to make the decision for the parcel of how that utility is billed.
You
to
don't
them.
necessarily opt in, right? You just.
Well, let me-
Bill, correct?
let me answer that in two parts. So the first is that it's important to remember that, especially with the stormwater utility fee, the fee runs with the parcel. So the tenancy or the ownership, that may be the name on the bill, but the bills will always go to the same address. if you will.
The parcel ID.
The parcel ID. So if a homeowner were to say, just throw it on the taxes and then sell, then yes, the next homeowner would have to pay on their
That's-
taxes.
yeah.
But then in the following year, when we send bills out again, that homeowner or whoever occupies that property in the meantime would have the option then to pay online, to come in, or to put it back on the taxes. So
Okay.
I imagine we would bill annually. So everybody would get a letter every year that gives them these options. And then, at each year, depending on whichever option is most convenient, you could pick from that each year.
Okay, so it's gonna be an annual bill that
Yeah,
parcel is going to get mailed to them.
Correct.
Okay.
With the option to pay upfront or have on their property tax, like a streetlight district.
Right, and then does SSI have is that gonna be like an interface with our website for a mobile, like an online payment option?
Yes, there's a
And-
mechanism for that.
Okay.
It would not be, strictly speaking, it would not be our website, but they have a payment portal that will process and reconcile it with your payment account, basically.
Okay.
So,
And have you gone into the discussion with our law director for delinquency services?
that would be a function of the collections agreement that we would have with the entity that, let me caveat that. How do you mean delinquency? For,
Collecting payment, if someone is delinquent on their utility?
basically, let me back up then. Sorry, I misunderstood your question. If somebody gets a letter, they have their three options to pay and we just hear nothing. In effect, that resident would be choosing to have it put on their taxes because we would basically submit it as an assessment to the county, for non-payment, if you will. So we would collect it on the tax bill.
And then if they opt to go in and pay it, not via property tax, and then they don't end up paying it, is that them saying they're not going to pay it? That's not a letter they're going to return. I don't want to pay
Nope,
this now.
they
They
would-
have to,
it's-
they
they
have
would-
to submit a
Belongs to
check.
the property.
Yeah, they would basically, what I envision is a letter that goes out that says, here's your total bill for the year. You were welcome to visit this link to pay online right now, or you can come to City Hall to pay by X date. If we
Okay.
don't hear from you after X date,
Then it
or,
gets
or your
into that.
third option is just ignore this letter. And if we don't hear from you by X date, we'll go ahead and assess the same way we do streetlights or other
So
things.
they're not necessarily opting in to pay, have it paid, put on their tax.
Correct.
They
We
just chose
could-
not to pay the other two routes. so
Yeah,
therefore
you
it's
can just
going on.
take no action and we'll go collect the same way we do for streetlights. It's just that we have to have a
That
letter
makes
to show the
sense.
county that we've attempted to collect before the county will put it on the
That
tax
makes
bill.
sense. So it's not like a true utility in the sense of like, we have services that we can cut off. Or like go after someone and garner something on their like a credit report.
But it'll stay on the
It's-
property.
It'll
It'll,
just
it'll
stay
follow
on
the property.
And if they go delinquent on their property tax and lien on the property, that
Mhm.
makes sense.
Yeah.
The last thing I would just say
Mhm.
is just a recommendation from my experience would be that there's a lot of change happening in finance, staffing, new software. And with a lot of this change, I don't know if it's something that's in your radar, or it's been incorporated in another process, but a desk audit in a sense for the finance and finance operations, because we're not going to know upfront what the time commitment is going to be for utility billing.
Right.
From this not being a traditional utility in a sense where it's a paid monthly recurring fee that we're going to have someone at the counter like day over day for an extended period of time collecting checks or running credit cards and things of that nature. I'm not so worried. It's just like at one point in time, it's going to be kind of a lot of work. But just kind of understanding what efficiencies have been driven with the changes that have been made, and then adding on this additional task, what that like staffing commitment would kind of need there in a desk audit, I feel would be very appropriate at this time.
Yeah, I mean, and that's certainly something that we'll look at. I mean, I think that the initial thought process for us is that the big staffing capacity lift in the near term is just configuring this thing to work. This thing meaning the utility billing software program.
Yeah.
Once it's configured, then the staffing lift becomes if, I have rain barrels and I want to take advantage of the credit that's in the ordinance, or I'm a corporation and I want to submit new drawings with new square footages. The staffing lift there is, okay, we have to validate that and then go into the system to update what we're actually going to bill and collect. So that's the piece where I think a desk audit would help,
Mhm.
but we have to kind of have some of this in place in
Yeah.
order to gauge it. So-
Yeah, and we can't, and you don't know what you don't know right now.
Right, right.
What that commitment's going to need to look like.
So the only other thing that I wanted to briefly share with everyone this evening is just, again, a draft. So these numbers are placeholder numbers, and I want to be very clear about that. The concept that we've been discussing over the last several months has been an ERU rate, an equivalent residential unit rate of about $10 a month. And that is the same assumption that I've baked into here. But I wanted to show you a little bit about the math that's going into the model. And again, all draft, all placeholder numbers, but certainly numbers that we could continue to work with as this process unfolds. So the first thing I wanted to briefly bring to your attention is that the 2015 study identified about $15 million in capital needs alone for major stormwater infrastructure projects. So to be clear, that's not regular curb and gutter maintenance. These are specific projects that are in that plan from 2015. They're all over the city. That amount was about 15 million. If you run that through an inflation calculator, at least as of a month ago, or a couple weeks ago, 15 million in 2015 dollars is about 19 million today. So we've in terms of the capital construction costs. So what I've done is made an assumption that we're going to amortize that out over 20 years. We're going to say, if we're going to try to do $19 million worth of work over a 20-year period, how much do we have to have every year to make that happen? All things being equal, it's about $950,000 a year. So that's the first component of what we would try to collect every year. The second would be staffing or the ongoing operating costs. This goes to Councilmember Lomatch's point, which is that there are some things that we do right now in the service department that support stormwater directly. Culvert cleanouts, anytime we're going to patch, sewer cover, those sorts of things with concrete. And our reasonable estimate at this point is that we could offset about $680,000 of public service costs today, stormwater related costs today. But in addition to that, we would look at hiring some new positions that we could dedicate exclusively to stormwater. That would be a utility billing
We
piece,
would have to,
right?
because
It
we
would.
don't have staff to do that.
Correct, and it would be not just the utility billing piece, but probably something equivalent to a stormwater manager, which is kind of like an engineer. Somebody that can, again, validate these calculations, maintain a database, help with the administration, the day-to-day of this. But also that 450 would probably include some frontline labor, because we're going to need crews, we're going to need supervisors to go out and actually do this work. So there's a handful of positions there that we could likely go ahead and attribute to stormwater. And then the annual billing costs, and this is kind of a round number, 60,000 a year is about what it would cost us in annual license fees for all of the software, plus any of the collection related expenses that we may have to pay. So in terms of operating costs, operating costs alone, we would need to bring in about 1.2 million. So if you add 950 plus 1.2 million, you get to about $2.1 million a year that we would need to bring in new revenue in order to manage and administer a stormwater program. The total amount of ERUs in the city, residential and commercial, all parcels, is about 18,421. And so if you just divide the 2.1 million by the total number of ERUs that are out there, the base ERU fee under these assumptions is right around that $10 mark. So what I'm trying to illustrate is that I think that $10 conversation to date has been fairly reasonable. If we were to proceed in this direction, we would collect enough to basically implement our stormwater program over a 20-year period and continue to maintain it at the same time, at least in terms of these inflation adjusted dollars and the assumptions that I'm showing here. So again, just a high level back of the napkin, if you will, some math on how this sort of breaks down in terms of what we would look to collect and how that money would be spent. Any questions on those assumptions?
We're basing the measurements that were done in 15 on how much pervious and impervious. And are we just going to trust people that they've changed, if they put in a new driveway or if they've added a room on, or because that happens?
Yeah.
So that would change their, but are we talking about charging the same amount to everybody
So-
regardless?
Right. So that's a conversation that I don't know that I'm ready to have tonight.
Okay.
So all we're trying to show here is that out of all of the impervious surface in the city, that's that 18,400 number.
Right.
Out of all of that area, on average, it's about $10 per. And in general, a resident, a homeowner would pay one ERU or about $10 a month. But I think what you're sort of alluding to is the specific billing structure that we might apply may look a little bit different from this. That's a conversation that we would probably have later on in the year.
So we haven't made that decision whether everybody pays the same
Correct.
versus,
And
Okay.
that's correct. And the ordinance, all the ordinance requires is that we establish two billing tiers, one for commercial and one for
Right.
residential. And so we
Understand
have plenty of flexibility in the ordinance to get a little creative and find the best approach. But that's a conversation that I would save for another work session.
got it.
Any way that goes, it needs to add up to this $2.1 million.
Yeah, that would be an idea. Yes. To get to this level of service is the best way of saying that.
And you
Yeah.
get to that number by the way you just outlined. So
Correct.
we're not
Right.
just grabbing a number out of thin air.
In the education that needs to go into this is in whatever you put out in your education piece is what are these going to do? And we're talking about Lily Creek and you
Yep.
know, and people don't understand it's not just going and fixing their gutter.
Right.
Huh? Mary Ann is the big thing and Lily Creek, those two things are.
That's all I
Thank
had. Yep.
All right, well,
That's
any
helpful.
follow-up questions about stormwater at this time before we move along? All right, well then, Mr. Manager, we have one more one more work session item.
All right, and I will turn it over to Ms. Holtz for a presentation regarding community reinvestment areas. And Councilmember Joseph, I'm sure will be delighted that we're going to put the new clicker to the test this evening.
It's like we.
Can you try it though? Let's make sure that it actually works. Hey, there we go.
Hey,
We're in the 21st
Wait.
century.
we fast forward from the slide, we moved from 2015 on to 2023. So welcome
I said that
Well
earlier.
done.
What were we clapping for?
the new clicker.
Oh, I thought it was for Naya.
Oh,
Yeah.
and
Well,
two,
let's basically clap for Naya as well.
and
Actually,
the,
I should share this.
in my pet peeve, that's now sitting on the podium.
Seamlessly.
I won't ask what the updates for getting this system to work cost. Nobody wants to talk about that, right, Josh?
Well, we haven't had a quote yet for this, for the AV system, you mean?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's all in process. So
Okay,
My
we don't,
suggestion is we don't.
duly noted. Take it away, Ms. Holtz.
Well, good evening. I'm just going to give you a brief update on community reinvestment areas, CRAs, before we jump into the meat, which is appointing a housing council. As you know, we talked about a few weeks ago, the Ohio Department of Development regulates the CRA program. We have three areas, and our districts are northern, central, and southern. We had 2 inquiries a couple weeks ago, still assessing those out. But in order to do that, we have to appoint a housing council, and that is where you come in. We just worked on this. Well, the
Here, I
clicker.
can-
spoke too soon.
Oh, wait a minute. Actually, that might have been me. Try it again.
It's.
There we
It's
go.
because I clicked Zoom before I clicked the
Oh, okay.
PowerPoint. It's my fault.
So this is the map of our areas, as I said, northern, central, and southern. Our housing council has 3 terms, but they're appointed in a very particular way based on our resolution. The mayor, Mr. Mayor, you have to appoint 2 members.
You got it.
The council as a whole appoints 2 members, and then planning commission appoints 1. You can think about after this presentation, who you would like to appoint to this housing council. It could be amongst yourself, residents at large, which will have to be appointed by the housing council later. But that is what you need to think about. As a whole, this board, this council will be responsible for reviewing the applications that come in and seeing if they are qualified for that tax exemption and making that recommendation to move forward in the process so that city staff and legal can start the negotiation process for a CRA tax exemption. That is their role, to make sure that those applications even qualify for moving forward in the process. Are there any other questions? I was trying to make it quick. I know you guys have been here quite a while.
Can you just briefly talk about just to confirm?
Yes.
So the housing council would hear these requests for CRAs, but they do not unilaterally give the exemption.
They do
correct?
not.
It goes to
Their
council.
their role is to review the applications and make sure that they are qualified to move forward in the process to even get the tax exemption.
And does the city manager, does the final authority rest with city council, or do we recommend it to the state and the state makes a final determination?
So it rests with you. Oh, so if you.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So what happens is we make an agreement, we negotiate with the developer, come to terms with the agreement, and then put into a ordinance, and then you would decide within 15 days, we have to put all the documents, including that legislation, to the state.
Okay,
And we're one of the few communities in the area that don't have one.
Well, we do. We have
Active
the
ones.
river loss.
oh, that's right. We do
Yep,
have
the river
one
loss.
active
So we
one.
do have one. They were granted a CRA.
So I think the ask really is that if you all have thoughts about who you'd like to appoint to the housing council to sort of fulfill this role, let us know. I believe it requires a letter of appointment.
That's correct.
Okay,
Mhm.
so we don't need officially a resolution. We would treat it similarly to how we appoint BZA or planning commission, where council would make a motion to appoint someone and then a letter would go out from there if that motion was successful.
Yep.
Sorry, I don't mean to talk
So
over
if,
your.
if the
My
question that
yeah.
Deputy
Yes.
Mayor had was, we have an active CRA at Riverside Lofts, correct?
Yes.
Yes,
And
and
so
that's-
every
Is there a
year
housing
that has to
council?
be-
Is that through St.?
St. Mary's.
That's right, yes.
It was through St. Mary's though,
Mhm.
not through the city, because we don't have a council. So, and it went
So
through the
it-
county housing board then.
Yes, it did, but
Oh,
we don't
okay.
have a standing one, so we have to reactivate that board, reconstitute it.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying
Yeah.
that.
And this council would select their chairman, right? Like the. 5
Yes,
people
once
that we
it gets
select.
all selected. Mhm.
Chairperson.
And the housing council would, in effect, similar to BZA or planning, they would have a staff report prepared. I would imagine that if there's one that comes up, that people that maybe would have hesitation, say, well, I don't know anything about community reinvestment areas. The staff would be able to give them a lot of guidance on what it is they're looking for, what it is that they would be recommending or not recommending, or questions they might be asking. So as we're all thinking about people that might be good fits for this, that there will be ample support. Is that a good way to say it?
Yes, yes. And I'm glad you said that because they will be making recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think
and
we
that's-
would, I wouldn't want to discourage anyone who maybe doesn't have a whole lot of experience with CRAs or developments. Really, the purpose of a housing council like this is exactly to your point, Mr. Mayor. I mean, we as staff would obviously do our due diligence and prepare some reports and introductory materials and really try to walk and accompany people through a process like this to sort of explain, here's the request that's being made, here's what you're legally allowed to recommend under the statute. Here's kind of our opinion, professional opinion about whether that this request is appropriate. And then to answer any questions that come out of that so that the council can make a good recommendation.
Yeah.
And I believe that this is going to give Riverside more of in the game about what happens, because the St. Mary's project sort of never did come here. And some people weren't happy about that, but we should have this so we can have better control over what happens to housing in our city.
And this CRA, yes, we have the housing council, that's what it's called, but it can be used for commercial development as well.
Right.
Decide if a CRA is warranted, those types of development.
And the map is available on the website, right? The CRA areas.
It is not at this time.
We'll put it there though.
Yep.
Okay, that's just good
Mhm.
information to have, because it is different areas of the city are represented there, and that shows that there are opportunities in multiple parts of our city.
So for us that don't really understand what the heck a CRA does for a developer, why would they ask
Tax
for
incentive.
that? And what are the positives for them as far as what it does for a developer?
Do you want to take a shot at that?
So for a housing development, if they're doing new construction, it can help with the construction costs if there is a public good. For a commercial development, very similar. They're bringing jobs in. If they are, especially for a community, the areas that we've identified in our CRA, there hasn't been a lot of growth and development. We are incentivizing them to come to those areas and really invest in the community by giving them a tax exemption for a set period of time.
For
A property-
improvements that they make.
So.
Right,
so
it's a
if-
property tax
Okay,
exemption.
so it's like a tip.
Correct.
Similar
Yes.
to a tip.
It's
Similar.
similar to a TIF, except that, and reel me in.
Yes.
But it's similar to a TIF, except that instead of that money going into a fund that the city administers, it's provided as a direct tax incentive or a tax
the
break
time
to
of
the
the- yeah,
developer.
Right.
And we
Right.
negotiate those terms with the developer.
I think their public probably would have needed that explanation. as
Yep.
well.
Well, and I also like that, that Naya outlined that the areas, CRAs are not found anywhere, just anywhere.
Yeah.
The areas where they are designated are because of, things that there's factors involved with selecting the area and how the area is determined that, I think we as a city would want to, allow investments to maybe be more encouraged in some of those areas. And for that reason, I think that it's something that we should, as the deputy mayor said, we should have it to be in the game. So it's something that I'm hopeful that we can find a reason to drive investment in some of these areas that maybe haven't had as much investment. And that's reflected in some of the census tract data that you can pull from those areas.
that's all we have.
All right.
Right.
Any other questions about CRA before Ms. Holt, our city manager, move on? All right. Thank you. And then city manager updates, the best part of our meeting,
That's flattering.
right after adjournment.
No, I'll be very brief. I did want to acknowledge that the Riverside Chamber received an award or this morning. I believe at the President's Club. So congratulations to them for all the hard work that they do. And on a related note to that, we are all, I think, everybody, at least on staff, is very much looking forward to welcoming Chipotle to our community here coming up in the next week or so. So very excited for that. Tuesday. Thank you. So yes, very excited for that. And just, I think, another sign of the incredible progress that we're making over here. So thank you to all of you for all of your support.
Council member comments. Mr. Maxfield, Mr. Joseph.
I got 2 hours.
Right. I have nothing. Moving on.
I do want to just thank the staff that showed up at 7 o'clock this morning. The President's Club of Dayton are the ones that recognize the Riverside Chamber as well as the Fairborn Chamber for volunteerism in support of the base and all of those activities. And we had a nice show, and I appreciate the mayor and the city manager being there at 7 o'clock in the morning, and of course, the secretary of the organization that was recommending the Riverside Chamber, Katie, the clerk, is the secretary. So we had a nice contingent there, and I appreciate the support, as I'm sure Brett, Domisic, and Lynn appreciate. Thank you for showing up.
Ms. Fry?
Yes, I have a couple things. One, I really don't understand the hostility towards St. Mary Development Corporation, but I feel the need to say that I appreciate having the loss in our community and that they
Hostility, it's just.
and they do good work for the members of our community. So I appreciate them. I also want to publicly thank the JCs for the quiet work they do in our community. I have a family member that lives in Mad River Manor. And she doesn't get out of her apartment very much, but the JCs did a community meal at the manor, and she was able to go and attend, and she had a wonderful time. And I was very happy to see how much it warmed her to be able to have that opportunity. So thank you to the JCs for doing that.
We try to do one a year, at least one a year. And it hasn't always been easy because of the roads. And then with COVID, it kind of stopped. But yeah, it's something that we're starting up.
And
that's it.
Okay.
I got nothing.
Yes. I just wanted to tag on to Brenda. I have a tremendous amount of love for St. Mary's, and Tim Beat, their executive director, and their staff. Phenomenal folks. They do great work here. They do great work across the region. And I would just echo your sentiment, Brenda, that I truly admire that organization, and they're doing work that a lot of other folks aren't able to do or don't do for parts of our population that oftentimes don't have much attention. So I would certainly share your sentiments of admiration for that organization.
Thank you.
They're wonderful neighbors.
And I didn't mean to imply otherwise. It's just, we need to be in the game.
And we have, we're on to the best part of the agenda. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
No, second.
We have a motion from Quick Draw McGraw, from Mr. Maxfield, and a second from Mr. Joseph to adjourn at 7:09 PM. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay.